Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room episode number 135 for the 22nd of May in 2019. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I'm usually from Missoula, Montana, where I work at the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula, Montana. But tonight, I am on the road in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with my wife, doing a little long holiday weekend and exploring the sights and scenes of this area of the country, which I've spent almost no time. But instead of talking about Santa Fe, I want to go over to my friend, Dr. Wes Fryer. Wes, who are you and what are you doing here?
Well, I am a construction worker that has wandered into the home of a person that looked like they had a lot of technology today in Oklahoma City. No, I am Wes Fryer and still the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School, where we are wrapping up our semester. This is our last week of classes and finals. My ninth grade daughter has 2 more tests in French and geometry tomorrow, and my wife has a couple more days. And anyway, we have a week of professional development next week, and we'll have graduation that first Saturday of June. So I am excited to be joining, and we apologize for those of you that may have wanted to join us live. Wow, things are going on with YouTube, and we could not get this to work on 3 different computers in 2 different locations. And so here we are in Zoom with our backup plan, and hopefully this recording will go well. So, Jason, where would you like to start tonight in the exciting links that we've got here? I think you may have a few more that you didn't put in. So feel free to take us far afield wherever you would like to go.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of interesting security news this week, so let's start there. I guess maybe the easy one that's maybe more technical that I think kind of gives a sense of the security problems that are plaguing us right now in the broader technical world. There was an interesting article from Inc. magazine, actually it was an undated article. This is kind of viral-y, but I wanted us to push out this message because I think it's super interesting. The CEO of Delta Airlines recently conducted an interview where he talked about what his biggest fears are. And obviously the airline business, not just in the United States, but worldwide, is under constant threat due to climate change and where airlines will end up in kind of a post-climate change world. There's also issues related to the prices of petroleum, where we go with alternative fuels with airlines, and then most recently, of course, most major airlines in the world have been dealing with the aftermath of the Boeing jet grounding that happened after those 2 jets crashed due to what appears to be software errors. But despite all these things, the airline CEO, and his name is Ed Baston, and he was talking to Kai Risdell from Marketplace, which is a PRI radio program on economic news, and they said, "So what's your biggest worry? What keeps you up at night?" And he said that the thing that I think most about regards to my business and where we're going with things is cybersecurity. And obviously, the airline industry is heavily steeped in tech, right? Like there's so many systems, and oftentimes, if you've ever been a frequent traveler and run into delays, if a computer system goes down, it can really take down really the entire airline grid, not just in the United States and internationally. But it's interesting, I think the frequency and also the tone of articles that we refer to on a weekly or every other weekly basis when we talk about security are starting to get more, it feels like a little more aggressive in their warnings and in the real possibilities of true security issues. But obviously, if airlines are worried about this, then every industry is likely to be impacted by that. And it's probably not news per se, but maybe a message out there to all those that are tech directors in schools and are reading all the gloom and doom related to security. Please know this is impacting really every industry, and whatever good work you're doing to lock down your network or to create better end-user policies and procedures, teaching security, not just to your staff, but students and also parents from the outside. It's work that's necessary. It's work that is worth your time. And unfortunately, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better in regards to the security piece. So not real news per se, but I just thought that was a really interesting comment that it's of all the challenges of the airline industry, cybersecurity is what keeps the CEO up at night.
Well, it's actually a good segue to the article I've got there from the Free Press OKC, which I'm sure is the extremely popular news source there in Missoula, Montana. But this is from May 21st, 2019, and the article title is "After 7 Days, Oklahoma City Public Schools Says Network Fully Operational After Attack." And Oklahoma City Public Schools is one of our two largest districts here in the state of Oklahoma with over 45,000 students. And they were subject to a ransomware attack that hit them a little over a week ago. So I do not have any personal insight into this in terms of I have not reached out to friends of mine that are in the district and in the know. I've just read some articles. One person at school has visited with somebody as far as just learning a little bit about just how serious it is. The author of this article, because I actually tweeted this as I usually do for articles that I'm going to be sharing on the show, contacted me about having an interview, and I actually may be interviewed tomorrow. I ran that by our communications director and our head of school, and I think the interview topic is basically how are you trying to be proactive to be preventing these kinds of things from happening. And so I think I'm probably going to write a blog post about that. But certainly, like you mentioned, the educational aspects of trying to educate users about not clicking links that might in any way be suspicious, being careful where you're logging in. The whole phishing threat is gigantic, but we've been on a multi-year move, as I think probably most schools, but maybe not. But we certainly have been to move to the cloud, where we are, we've gone in the last 10 years from about 13 physical servers to 3. And one of those, has virtualized instances, and it's just we are, maintaining a microcosm of data compared to what we used to in the past. Certainly, going to Google and all of email and file storage in the cloud is huge and gigantic. But the first year I started 4 years ago as the director of technology, we were moving from local servers hosted on site to cloud hosted servers. And so anyway, there's a lot of different things that we do. Security is not there is no single panacea. And unfortunately, in organizations like schools, the weakest link are the users, and you can do all you really want to as the administrator and the security person or whatever. But ultimately, the vulnerability, a lot of it just, comes down to what users are going to do, what they're going to share, what they're going to click on. Two-step verification. I was going back and looking. It was back in 2017 that we made the decision to go ahead and move all faculty and staff over to two-step. We took almost a year to get everybody to do that. I think it was in the spring that I had gone to a meeting where I had heard actually just one other tech director talking about that. But as we discussed that and I did more research, I basically recognized that is just a key element. And so along with password managers and encouraging users to use unique and long passwords on every single website, which I'm sure all organizations, probably except Google maybe or whatever, there's probably some organizations really with the use of physical keys that are, in a better place with all of that. But anyway, this is, last year, I think you guys had that attack that affected Montana schools. I went to a cybersecurity day that was hosted by our local affiliate of COSN, the Consortium of School Networking, about 3 weeks ago. And I'll drop into the show notes. I made a Twitter moment, which I've been using instead of Storify. Storify is offline, but moments are collections of tweets that could be from you and from other people. And I like doing those now for events. Anyway, it was a fantastic day, and basically all technology directors and IT professionals from schools around the state. And so it's that was mentioned, the Montana situation, which was really odd in terms of the way in which the schools were being, the data in that case was being sent directly to parents, and it was really a weird thing. So I did actually hear a rumor, and I'm not going to repeat it online as far as how much the ransomware supposedly has been for in this case, but when you add up the costs of being, here we are into the semester, right? Data's got to go in, just, critical time. These are things that, yes, I think are just going to continue to get worse before before they get better. So I will add that I look forward to, I think, 38 days from now when I pass the torch formally over at our school, and I will be stepping down as the director of technology and have a new role where I am basically able to focus on academics, and then I'm going to teach a couple classes this year. So I'm looking forward to that, because the responsibility that you feel for the security of your data, your network, your users, it's huge. And, for larger organizations, there are individuals that are specifically tasked to be security officers. In our case, we have 2 full-time people in our technology department. We have a half-time database person that we share with communications, and we have others that help us, of course. But anyway, it's a big load. And I think that, whenever I hear about airline delays, it seems like there was a big delay around the last time either our son was flying home or I was flying. I think it was when I came home, and I came home later. My first thought was, well, that was probably cyber attack, because it was something that had affected multiple airlines and delays, and you think, computer system. So I'm glad that you were able to safely get there to Santa Fe. And I do hope that whenever, the FCC, we hear them talk about these upgrades they're going to do to their systems. And we've got some apparently pretty stable, pretty safe systems. And thinking about, the potential of problems with a new network upgrade there is pretty sobering. But I'm sure there's going to be lots and lots of smart people working to try to make that happen smoothly at whatever point that does happen.
Sure. Well, let's go. We have a couple of more specific articles related to security this week, all of which are super interesting. One of them is something that I actually discovered yesterday in an email from Google, but The Verge reports on the 21st of May that Google has revealed that several G Suite customers have had individual users that have had passwords stored in a plain text file on servers for upwards of the last 14 years, which is an extraordinary number, especially for someone as I think security conscious as the folks that run the G Suite. But essentially what it comes down to was that there was a bug in their systems. It particularly impacted people that you had reset a password for on the administrative side of that interface. And so it can generate a password for you, or you can choose a password and oftentimes force those users to then go in and change the password to something else. I received an email from Google Central yesterday with a spreadsheet with, I think it was about 19 users. And considering that if you include all of our archived users, we have upwards of 25,000 G Suite users in our system. The fact it only impacted 14 of that group tells me this is probably a pretty unique bug that didn't apply very widely to a lot of instances. But this is the stuff you got to keep track of. And more importantly, I think it highlights that, one of the reasons why we use G Suite as part of my day job at the Montana Digital Academy is that they run all the security for us. We don't have to apply patches. We don't have to monitor security. We don't have to look at if there are patches released for new vulnerabilities for Linux servers or any of the pieces that help run the back end of the kind of corporate Google Suite. But despite the energy that I know goes into that, there's still errors. You take a lot of the human fallibility that comes with people that maybe only have a little bit of experience. I know when I first propped up G Suite for my organization, I did it on my own, and I was a pretty tech-savvy teacher, but I wouldn't call myself a tech director or someone experienced at setting up systems by any stretch of the imagination, but it still happens. And so I know I saw some traffic on the G Suite administrators Google group that I think both Wes and I are subscribed to, that email had ended up in a number of G Suite users yesterday's administrative accounts. But yeah, super interesting that is the case. By chance, Wes, did you get that email yesterday?
Was that the one about all the logins that happened, or?
Yeah, this is the there was users that had passwords that up until they patched the vulnerability.
Yeah, no, I didn't see it. However, it very well could have come to our main admin account, which is not connected to me, and so
sure.
I'll look for that. I wanted to mention, and taking this to thinking about how do we become proactive with this in addition to moving to the cloud? Last Friday, or Thursday, I took the day off and was up at our church, and along with the network consultant that has worked there with them for years, we interviewed all the staff, and they're looking at different information systems, and we were basically, being an outside, kind of perspective on, hearing what their pain points were, et cetera, but talked about a lot of different things. He showed me Amazon Workspaces, which allows you to spin up a Windows 10 instance or whatever you want, have as much RAM and CPU cores as you need, do your processing, and then either just kill it or, have it, but spin it down where it doesn't, cost as much and have as much. Holy cow, that is just incredible. And if you do that, as you mentioned, in your situation, you don't have to worry about updates. You don't have to worry about patches. All of that stuff is taken care of for you. We are still running our own domain controller, handling DHCP, handling our DNS, and we probably do need to, I don't think the network can work without, having that, but that server, there are some ways in which that can be virtualized. And of course we have things backed up and stuff like that. That's another part of your strategy as far as preparing for any kind of cyber attack. But I think that it is such a game changer to see what Amazon is doing, and then other companies in terms of the virtualization of computing resources. The first time I ever set up a, oh gosh, what's it called? When you have you can install all of your WordPress and these different engines. Basically, it's a hosted account.
Right, like SoftCallus is one of them.
Yeah, and there's a term, or cPanel.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Anyway, spinning that kind of thing up, and then realizing how many of the kids, and this was a few years ago, in our state, are still just learning Dreamweaver. They're still just coding HTML, and it's like, right. Holy cow, the velocity of web design and where we're moving with the web is, difficult and challenging to stay up with. And that, my thought there was, hey, I think rather than, buy software, we ought to, spin up a cPanel account for different students, and then be able to, let them see what kinds of software they can run and things that they can do. So anyway, it's pretty, it's hard to kind of keep your head around all of this. It's vital that we have dedicated professionals in our schools, not only people that we can afford to keep on staff, and depending on the size of your school, that's going to vary, but this is also a really important place for trusted vendor partners, right? And folks that are going to really come alongside and help and have a preparedness plan for how are we going to deal with, the different perspective, not only attacks, but other kinds of disasters. We live here in tornado country. So, anyway, I think that this gives you a lot of food for thought, and hopefully, as a school district, not only do you have staff that are on these topics and staying up to speed with them, and implementing a strategy where your organization is continuing to move towards a more secure and redundant and protected environment in terms of everything that's happening with computing, but you're also partnering with vendors and folks that are going to really be able to come alongside and help, because security professionals are expensive, and these incidents are very expensive, and unfortunately we are not immune in education to any of these kinds of issues in terms of not only systems that can just fail and go offline, and we're going to make sure we got to have our backups and everything in place, but also just attacks and what it would mean for breaches and privacy. Sure. and all of those kind of things.
Okay, Wes, is any other security article we should cover tonight?
Let's see. There's a CNBC article I dropped in from May 18th. It's called "Why Some of the World's Top Cybersecurity Hackers Are Being Paid Millions to Use Their Powers for Good." I have heard or read a couple articles recently. In fact, even one was about the Marine Corps that was hiring folks. I think this was like sort of volunteers, but they were also paying money. Anyway, just really trying to get white hat hackers to come in. You didn't have to, follow the typical basic training and, cut your hair and do all the kinds of normal things that you might do when you join the military. This is such an important aspect of not only the computing landscape, but it's everybody, right? Everybody has their data, their information online, and cybersecurity is just continuing to get more and more important. And so this says that the shortfall of cybersecurity workers for available jobs could reach as high as 3.5 million unfilled by 2021. I mean, that's in 2 years, right? I mean, that is just crazy. And so this is really interesting. So the article is talking about a startup called Synac, and they're hiring freelancers. And so and I think they were talking about one of them just reaching $1 million. And so rather than just sign on with one company, you could be a freelancer and then be on a team and, try to identify vulnerabilities and then, be paid bug bounties for identifying things. But really, really interesting because it's kind of sort of like gig economy employment, where we think about somebody working on a contract basis, no health care, no benefits, no permanent job security. But in this case, it could even be more lucrative and beneficial for folks to be able to use their skills as white hat hackers and, basically be a gun for hire. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. So I haven't heard the advertisements for it this year, but I know Rose State, which is one of our local community colleges here in Midwest City, it's near just north of Tinker Air Force Base to the east of the city. They have, for the last several years, had cybersecurity boot camps, and they've got that program. I mean, the salaries that folks start out with, I want to say they start at like $70,000 and up. Yep. This is just for a 2-year community college program. And our assistant tech director actually went to that summer before last and was pretty impressed. It was just kind of a taster, but I would encourage folks to find out what's going on in your area. Let people know, right? Because this, we don't know what the future holds with careers and stuff like that, but we can say confidently that, barring some kind of global EMT, solar flare,
right. Worst case
crazy
scenario stuff.
Some kind of worst case scenario. We're just going to have more and more digital all around us, and folks that are going to be able to help protect us and keep our system safe are going to be in high demand. So that is a real clear connection to the classroom. And I would say also, and I hope that next year and in the years to come, I can do more with this. I think we need to bring more parents and alumni and just others in our networks into classrooms for students to be able to hear from and talk to who are involved in doing cybersecurity, doing computer-based work, and really try to help students think about what a career pathway might look like if they're going to do something like that. I know our son, who was home from college this last week, was talking to, he's finished his junior year now in college, he's talking to our 18-year-old who's about to start college, and she's looking at forensics, and he really encouraged her to think about forensic science, digital forensic science,
Yep.
and the ways in which technology is going to play into that. And it's interesting to see how people will hear and listen to folks differently, right? So mom and dad can say things, but when brother says something, it's
Right.
a different way. The same thing is happening with kids in terms of their peers or who they listen to, and whether that's their teacher or somebody else. And so I think that's another connection here to think about ways in which we can bring and highlight folks in the classroom for students to be able to think about their careers, their skill sets, and what's available in the local community, because there may be some kind of summer programs or certifications or things like that that are available that might not involve a degree and necessarily something that's a massive commitment, but it may be some kind of a taster and something that can orient kids towards that kind of a career.
Right. Well, and the other thing I thought about when you mentioned this article was that it does help also highlight the extreme challenge of keeping qualified teachers that can teach this stuff in K-12 schools. Let's ignore the challenge of finding qualified technicians, qualified tech directors, and how many teachers have been thrust into that role that have to remain largely self-taught in that arena. In fact, my colleague at the Digital Academy, Mike Agustinelli, was a tech director for a smaller school district in Montana for a couple of years and came from a classroom environment, did a great job, but talked about how a lot of that was just kind of flying by the seat of his pants and doing a lot of reading and connecting with colleagues and doing the kinds of things you need to do to kind of teach yourself the best practices there. But then you go back into the classroom classroom to find folks that have the traditional pathway to get an education degree and make sure they have the proper endorsements for an industry that changes pretty dramatically every couple of years, and the focuses that are there. You mentioned Dreamweaver, Wes. It's an example of something that I know that tool still gets taught a lot. In fact, a lot of Adobe educators that work with the Adobe K-12 folks, do professional development for other teachers. Adobe has done a good job of maintaining Dreamweaver as part of their recommended suite for students, even though if I were teaching web design, and my guess is that if you were teaching web design, Wes, setting up a WordPress site and utilizing a platform like that to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you is better than coding from scratch in a lot of ways, especially if you don't intend on maintaining and keeping a secured lockdown website to be able to serve up that particular content. And the teacher shortage issue in the United States, actually, for most Western democracies, is my understanding. It's also true in Great Britain. It's also true in Canada. It's very real, right? But there are certain areas that used to be the conversation was about world language teachers or special education teachers, that those areas still have serious shortages. But if we are going to have increased attention on providing students more opportunities to take computer science courses or very deep computer science courses at the end of their 4-year high school education or 13-year K-12 education, that requires qualified teachers to do that. And that remains a huge challenge, I think, for our industry.
And to, your arena of expertise, the opportunities for distance learning, right? Because you may not be able to locally afford to have or have an opportunity to have that kind of a teacher, but through distance learning, you can. We are fortunate in Oklahoma to be the partner for this Malone network. And so we have students taking courses from Stanford University. And these are high level, like multivariate, statistics or advanced calculus. There's even some genomics and just awesome stuff that's beyond the curriculum of what we're going to be offering. And I'm thrilled that we're having a chance to do that. And sometimes people are thinking about distance learning a lot more on a course recovery basis. And there's obviously different purposes for that. But I think the arenas of cybersecurity and all kinds of niche fields that you just may not be able to have somebody on staff with. What a perfect opportunity for distance learning. I want to mention one other security article, and this is the Engadget article from May 18th. Google stats show how much a recovery number prevents phishing. And so we've talked a lot about two-step security on the proactive side. I absolutely believe that every single school organization, people are different as far as cellular and what's available and stuff, but we got to lock down our accounts, and we can't rely on teachers using 30-character random passwords. That's just not going to probably happen. And even if you're using that long, unique password, you still need to have another factor for authentication. And so this was a very interesting article because they have the statistics for Google, and just turning on, adding your phone number as far as a recovery device, this wasn't even saying that you needed to have two-step, really prevented the takeovers of your accounts. So definitely, this isn't a situation where it's all doom and gloom and there's nothing to do. I think there definitely are some clear pathways for what we need to be doing. And multi-factor authentication is a part of that roadmap.
Absolutely.
Can we talk about Huawei a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, this is a huge story. Why don't you start?
Well, we've talked about this for a number of weeks, and it's one of these things that's kind of a puzzle with everything else, which we won't go into, this dominating, political news screens and mainstream media, as well as social media in the United States. The CFO of this Chinese company, Huawei, which is the largest cell phone manufacturer in China and, competing with Samsung and Apple, was arrested a number of months ago and has been held in extradition. And, it's like, what is this and why is this going on? Well, things have really moved forward to the point where now the United States has placed Huawei and 70 of their affiliates, according to Reuters, on May 15th, on a U.S. trade blacklist. Then on May 19th, Reuters reported that Google has suspended some business with Huawei after this blacklist. What the chief executive of the United States did was basically sign an executive order which I think it declared an emergency or national security risk. And so anyway, he was able to do things, based on that kind of authority. And this has to do with 5G and the rollout of 5G technologies, the fears that many in the United States security agencies have that the Chinese government has been and will utilize their capabilities to siphon off information and data and be able to listen in and basically compromise the security of the United States citizens, United States government, and then also steal intellectual property. And so one of the really interesting things about this is, what does this mean for Huawei as a smartphone manufacturer? Because there is an open source version of Android that's out there, but in order to have things like Gmail, on your device, that actually requires a license from Google. And so there was I think there's another article. Yeah, this is from CNET on May 21st. Huawei already seeing a reprieve on the U.S. trade ban, report says. But what is this going to mean? Mashable said on May 20th why Trump's Huawei ban could cripple the company, basically saying, hey, if they can't have the App Store, so you have to have the Google App Store and to have Gmail, you got to have an agreement with Google. Well, China already has some different social networks and mail services and things like that, but they don't have a robust app store. So this would certainly impact Huawei in the European market. They're already being blocked in the United States market from widespread sale of their devices. I know when you were in Costa Rica, I think, didn't you see a Huawei phone there and pick one up? So
I did. Yep.
This is really, really big stuff. And again, we've mentioned it on the show. I lament that outside of speech and debate and folks preparing for extemporaneous, national tournament or whatever, like how many, teachers and students are sitting around and talking about, why are we in the middle of a trade war with China? What is up with Huawei? All of these, this blocks. What does this mean for the economy and what is it going to be going forward? So enlighten us, Jason. What is going on?
Well, so there's so many facets to this story, and I think it's also pretty interesting in that, I dream someday of giving up a day job and having enough money and access to good international health insurance to be able to maybe do the digital nomad thing for a couple of years, where I just do freelance work and maybe increase some of my current freelance work enough to where I could travel and live in various areas on Earth. You mentioned on my trip to Costa Rica over the Thanksgiving break in November, and we did go to a Costa Rican Walmart. And it was delightfully interesting and as overwhelming as a US-based Walmart, I might add. And in their electronics section, which looked a little more like a Costco electronics section than what I'm used to from the standpoint of a Walmart electronics section, but they had a whole cell phone section, and they had a variety of phones that most US consumers have never heard of before. We would call them mid-range phones in the United States and low-end phones, but there's just so many more choices because they're aiming cheaper phones with different compromises across the line to consumers outside of Western Europe and North America. So starting with the Huawei situation, for those of you that have been following the story, a lot of what the Trump administration said they were concerned about was networking equipment, right? So there's a variety of 5G implementations, and in fact, in the United States, there was a lot of talk that rural implementations of 5G, because it's so expensive to take areas of vast ruralness.
Montana, for instance. Oklahoma, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly, right. In fact, having spent a lot of time in eastern Montana in the last year, I can tell you that even the 3G service there can be a little spotty. And so companies like Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T that all have decent networks in Montana, as they want to roll out 5G, it's going to be really expensive to do that in the northeastern part of the state, where sheep well outnumber the number of human beings in that region. But that said, though, there have been Huawei phones that have made it into the United States market. I believe Huawei made the Nexus 5P, I believe, which was a Google phone that was released a couple of years back, and they picked a different manufacturer to manufacture those different phones. But you mentioned the app market piece of this. It's already pretty complicated for vendors like Huawei because parts of the Google suite just don't work in China. A good example of this is Google Maps. Google Maps has a lot of pretty advanced technology, and I think we take it for granted because it comes pre-installed on most phones. It's easy to download if it's not. If you go to China, there is no Google Maps there. The technology, you can download an illegal version of it, not illegal, an off-brand version of it that via side loading is what the process is called in apps. But a lot of the servers are based outside of China and are blocked, and so the technology is not particularly useful. So I did hear this week that Huawei had expected something to happen, and they do have an app marketplace. It's the Huawei Application Market, or a Huawei App Store. And I'll admit, I'm a little leery. Like, you can just download, in the same way you can download the Amazon App Store for Android, you can also download the Huawei App Store and be able to install pieces onto there. I'm a little leery of it. I don't have, well, let's put it this way. I'd want to take one of my, experimental phones at home and do this with a junk account, just in case the security protocol there isn't as strong as it would be elsewhere. But the bottom line is that instead of having a set of 20 or 30 apps that are really worldwide apps, what these actions are taking, and it also has to do with a lot of the threatened antitrust actions that the United States government, and then particularly the EU, is also perpetuating against platforms like Android. We might end up with 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 15 different app stores, right, that you can download onto your phone. And that creates fragmentation in that we may all be on different tools, right? Part of the prospect for me of a WeChat or a Facebook, for that matter, or Twitter, is that if we're all on the same general sets of tools, right, if those become the go-to tools to find people at, then you don't have to have 6 chat apps on your phone, or 5 app stores that install 6 different chat apps, because you can kind of centralize onto a set of few tools. But yeah, it's been interesting to watch this for sure.
Did we talk last week about the Supreme Court case for Apple and their monopoly thing? And did we talk about that?
I can't remember, but even if we did, let's remind folks of
that one
that.
in here, because that one's tied in. And so this is from May 13th, from The Verge. Supreme Court says Apple will have to face App Store monopoly lawsuit, and basically, everybody's mad at Apple. I mean, that's just common to. Especially when somebody's really successful. I mean, I'll put it that way, but they're very, very lucrative company. They've been very successful, so there's a lot of people angling for them. There's a lot of aspects to this as well, right? I mean, Apple's goal, and I'm dropping this link in here if you want to take a look at it, has been to take a 30% cut, essentially, of everybody's apps, and Netflix and other companies have definitely had some issues with that and that whole model. And so anyway, this is now supposed to have major impacts on Apple's bottom line, their stock price. This lawsuit is going to move forward, and from a security standpoint, it's really intriguing, right? Because we've got two competing views of how the world should work, computationally in terms of app stores, with Google being a much more open, a much more permissive environment for users, not doing nearly the stringent gatekeeping and censorship that Apple has done and continues to do. And so it will be interesting to see if this lawsuit and this whole train of advocacy, I guess, leads to a break in what has become the most vibrant and arguably successful app store in the world. And we're going to, have to look at other kinds of models, to your point, having more of a fragmented environment. It'll be interesting. It's been a while, but I guess I'll say it out loud. Okay, this will be transcribed someday, right? So it'll be searchable on the web. At one point, I was actually jailbreaking my phone I blogged about it on my blog under an alias. So if you ever look at my blog under Sherman Nicodemus was a guest blogger who wrote about jailbreaking because I wouldn't want to publicly admit that. But it was pretty intriguing. I mean, there were two main reasons I was doing it. One, I wanted to be able to tether my phone and not be limited in doing that.
Yep.
And I also wanted to be able to mirror my phone when I taught workshops, because this is the days before Apple TV, AirPlay, these different various mirroring apps and software and ways that you had to be able to do that. You had to jailbreak your phone. But anyway, so in the process of doing that, learned some different things, never bricked a phone, but that was where you loaded Cydia, which I think perhaps is still, sort of the jailbroken app store. And then once you have that, you can download stuff, but it's incredibly perilous, right? Because there's a lot of malware and malicious stuff that's out there. And so you're just much, much safer, with your iOS device, sticking with the regular app store and letting Apple protect you. So anyway, as a technologist, I learned a whole lot about smartphones and software and security and things like that as a result of that process. And I also got to do cool things with my phone that Apple didn't want to let me, do at that time. But I guess I would hypothesize that with this Supreme Court ruling, I think we're going to see changes in the ways that app stores are functioning on iOS, and I think that it may lead to a fractured environment, but it also may lead to more consumer choice. So that's, I guess, what I would just say. Hopefully, is that that's going to be beneficial for end users, but who knows? It remains to be seen.
Yep, absolutely. And in the meantime, I still think, at least on the Android side of the world, we could use more phone options in the United States. I'm now in week 3 of utilizing my Pixel 3a, although I am carrying an older phone with me this week just because I travel. When I travel, I usually bring my old V20 that's got a removable battery, so I had my super battery to it so that I can not have to worry about charging it on long travel days like today. I'm now up on hour number 18 or 19 of today, traveling from Montana to Santa Fe. But I love the mid-range phone that I picked up from Google, but I've also had great experience with low-end phones too, and could probably get away with a phone that's not $1,400 to do what I do with it. And I tend to pull more productivity out of my phone than probably the typical user. And, if we like it or not, this is something we have to figure out a way to come to terms with, despite the security or perception of security issues, whether they're real or not, is that we need additional manufacturers in China to provide other options for users around the world, right? And obviously there's emerging markets. India is a good example of this, where $25, $50, $100 cell phones have to be part of the equation there because of the sheer number of population and the way their economy works. It's also true, though, of advanced capitalist democracies like the United States, where we have a lot of people that rely on their cell phone. It's a critical piece. They're ignoring all the other social reasons why you might want to have a smartphone. Tons of government forms now are digital only. There are so many ways we interact with one another digitally that having access to a low-cost option is pretty important. But when you walk into T-Mobile, which I did a couple of weeks back, the real reality of the situation is that they're pushing you towards $900 phones, $1,100 phones, $1,300 phones.
I reject that.
I'm sure they're great, but
Yeah. Reject that. Well, on the note of technology that may not be quite as expensive, you dropped a couple articles about Chrome that seem exciting. You want to pick those up?
Sure, absolutely. First, I want to note that I am a 100% Chrome user now. I am using a Chromebox at work. It's temporarily on my desk as we're moving to new facilities, and it will end up in a conference room at some point. But I have the CTL i7 Chromebox with 16 gigs of RAM on my desktop right now, which means I'm using that 100% of the time, and then I'm carrying with me a Chromebook right now, and I just don't utilize other platforms. And so when I talk about Chrome being powerful, I'm not talking about handing out cheap, slow Chromebooks to your students and then having a MacBook Pro in front of the classroom. Like I'm eating the dog food here, right? Like I absolutely believe that if I'm going to advocate for this platform, I need to use it. So that comes with some expertise for me now because I feel like I'm working around things. So two super interesting articles. The first one is that from Chrome Unboxed, this was on yesterday on May 21st. Adobe has released something called Premiere Rush, which is I guess the best way to describe it is a kind of a video editor on the Android platform that seems like it's quite functional from what I'm able to see from screenshots. But the interesting part of that announcement is that they will be at some point allowing this to be installed on Chromebooks as part of the Android App Store that is implementable on Chromebooks. And so there are some things that are still woefully lacking in the Chrome world. A lot of them can be made up with maybe slightly less functional web-based tools. I'll admit, I don't really use Android apps that often. There are a handful of them that I use occasionally for kind of specialty implementations. But for me, it's all about just using web-based tools. But it's super exciting to me that Adobe is working on providing options for more high-end multimedia processing via their tools, which they're implementing on the Android platform.
On a related note, I have just almost finished. I think there's still at least one glitch identified. Implementing the single sign-on for Google for us to be an Adobe, basically, enterprise user. We went ahead and purchased the site license. If you have the need for 10 or more even educational licenses for Adobe Creative Cloud, it's worth it to just go ahead and pay $2,500 and get 500 licenses. And that's how they've got that all structured. But I'm also really excited because this gives us access to include our younger students that have Google accounts to single sign on to the Adobe Spark environment, which is completely free. And there are apps for Android and iPhone. I love those apps. Like I use Adobe Spark Post multiple times a week, maybe not every day, but almost every single day to make an info pick about something. And so anyway, I think this is very exciting. Adobe, has been and continues to be a hugely important player in the world of multimedia and creation. And so their move and pivot to some cloud-based and web-based tools is pretty exciting. I do think that designers and even thinking about schools and laptops for the foreseeable future, and this may change, and maybe you disagree with this, Jason, but like for high school kids who are going to be doing, graphic design and stuff like that, I think you still need to have a full-on Mac or PC to be able to run the Creative Cloud and have access to all those apps.
I agree.
However, there's a lot of users that aren't going to fit into that category, and the trajectory of the landscape here is that it's going to be continuing to move more to the cloud. So this is exciting for Chrome users.
Well, and something that's possible now that really hasn't been possible to this point because of the lack of cloud-based services is that it's very realistic for you to provide high-end laptops or high-end workstations scattered around a school for students to utilize those great high-end tools when they need them, and otherwise defer back to the inexpensive Chromebook when that's possible, because you just drop that stuff into cloud-based folders. You access those folders on the Mac or PC, which is essentially the strategy that allows me to move laptops all the time, right? I do try to maintain at least a functional knowledge of Mac OS and also of Windows 10, and I have devices at work of various vintages that allow me to do that, but I couldn't be productive without cloud-based file storage, right? And so when if I'm sitting here right now, and let's say I have a piece of media that I want to use in some other way or process, throwing that into my cloud storage. I happen to be a Google guy, although I have a lot of projects where I work with OneDrive. It's just as functional to allow me to go cross-platform, to take things from various devices and then go to the powerful PC or go to the powerful Mac that can do the video or audio processing and then save it back to the cloud again. And then I can go back to my more modest, cheap platform that can do those pieces. And
again, what about Amazon's workspaces, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, this may not be viable today, but for anyone who wants to be or who is a professional, being able to spin up a cloud-based version of updated OS, everything, the software you need. I mean, that is phenomenal. Of course, it all rides on bandwidth, right? So let's make sure
Yeah,
you've got
it
plenty
does.
of it, because, you know, if you're sitting out there with 3G, you know, connectivity, it's not going to cut it. But
Right,
I
absolutely.
think it's really exciting for cloud-based computing in the future, basically of almost a terminal-based computing environment, which is kind of what a Chromebook is, right? You're accessing
Right.
things on the cloud, and you're really not relying on a lot of horsepower locally to be able to do things.
Yep. And then one other interesting article too from Forbes. This is from Forbes on May 19th. It's an extended detailed analysis about why in the long term Chromebooks are likely to increase in price. And for now, probably 2 years, Wes and I have been promising to do kind of a Chromebook show to talk about some news and views related to that. Something that I have been thinking a lot of, though, is that I do think that one of the critical problems with the Chrome environment is that I do think people see cheap Chromebooks and assume that that's the way to get to one-to-one when they're not always the best application if you're buying $119 Chromebooks. It's not that they can't be functional. It's just that if you want something that can do a variety of things, you really do need to invest in some minimums that's going to take that price away from, you know, 89 for dated Chromebooks, 119, even 200 or 250 might not be enough to get a wide enough distribution of more powerful devices. But as touchscreens become the norm on Chromebooks, as higher end processors and more RAM and more storage, now that Android devices are used on these devices, that there may be an uptick over time, especially from traditionally low cost producers like Acer, that their Chromebooks that are intended for the masses may indeed go up in price. And part of it for me is that I used to advocate pretty strongly when people were shopping for Chromebooks. As an example, you got to have 4 gigs of RAM as a minimum, right? And you should prefer the Intel processor over the ARM-based processors. And there's some minimum advice there. But for me, I even think now that, I mean, obviously it's an expense to do that, but assuming you're going to keep a Chromebook around for 3, 4, 5, maybe even, well, the maximum will be 6 because that's the longest that Google supports it from an update standpoint. But I think even investing in $400 or $500 Chromebooks makes sense from the standpoint that the usability is going to be so much better for the end user that they won't be stymied by the low end hardware. My recommended Chromebook right now is the HP X360 14, which is the Chromebook I recently implemented as to our remote team. It's remote adults at the Digital Academy that do on the ground servicing and professional development for one of our programs called EdReady. And we decided to move away from Windows laptops and go with Chromebooks so we could manage them remotely. And it's a big Chromebook. It's 14-inch 1080p screen, has 8 gigs of RAM and an i3 processor, 8th generation i3 processor, and that thing is so flipping speedy. And
what is it? That's the name of it again?
It's an HP 14 X360, I think is the brand name of it. And they come in a weird color. It's got a white cover and a blue undercover, and so they kind of look a little Fisher Pricey, but it's speedy, and touchscreen comes with it as well, and it has the kind of 4-way convertible piece because you can put it in tent mode and regular mode and tablet mode. But it is an amazing laptop. They keep going on sale for below $500.
Yeah, it's $450 at Best Buy right now.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, it has the best keyboard I've ever used on a laptop too. But we have an Office one that's kind of our spare to sub in case we run into issues. And because we're an enterprise, right? It's maybe a small staff, but an enterprise. We bought some pretty decent insurance and extended warranty for them as well. So the price was higher than that. But that piece of hardware is so much more functional than if you go and buy the minimum spec Dell Chromebook, or you go to Lenovo and buy their minimum spec, and they'll even tell you they're aimed at students. And if really all you're doing in school is working on Google Docs, that's probably fine, right? But once you get anywhere more complex than that, or you are increasing the media complexity, both accessing and consuming and creating, that means you should invest more aggressively. And I get it. There are schools in Montana that have 9, 10, 11-year-old Windows hardware that they've carefully maintained and done minor updates to, and now it's running Windows 10 and it's just fine. It feels crisp enough to do basic things. We have to eke out every a squeeze of juice out of hardware to make the investment worth it in K-12 schools. But I do think at some point that the lure of Chromebooks being super cheap hardware is going to have to be rectified with the fact that the cheapest hardware really isn't for, it's not even for not for power users. It's really not for average or typical users either.
And I'm going to throw in the security piece too, which we spent half the show, talking about security articles. One of the ones, and I'll go ahead and pick this one up with Microsoft, is talking about this next Windows 10 update. This is ZDNet from May 21st. Windows 10 version 1903. Is it safe to install yet? There have been horrible issues with Windows and the updates to Windows 10. I spent more hours than I care to admit, prior to December, and just salvaging. I mean, it was related to firmware issues, but basically, once we unfroze with deep freeze some of our lab computers and it pulled down these updates, it display bricked these machines until we ended up, getting the firmware zapped and fixed, and it's been a nightmare. And so it definitely, as a director of technology, gave me an even more sour taste in my mouth for supporting, a Windows platform. But on the Mac side as well, I love Macs, right? I love my Apple stuff, and I'm surrounded by it, right? I've got three Apple screens, right here that I'm utilizing. But when it comes to security, both Mac and Windows are more complicated, and there's more vectors for, hackers and folks that want to do malicious things to be able to, get into those kinds of systems. So it's the return on investment and what you're talking about, how many years our school is going to be able to eke out, is really important. And that's a hugely important thing, to not just say, hey, I'm going to just buy the cheapest, the cheapest whatever. I mean, that's always been an issue with one-to-one, right? Some people are like, hey, what's the cheapest price you can get stuff on my loading dock? I'm going to buy that. Guess what? That is probably not the best device for you for a lot of different reasons. And one of them is going to be the return on investment and how long and how durable and long lasting those things are going to be. But consider security in all this. And Chrome, in my view, is the absolute winner when it comes to security and ease of support from an IT standpoint.
And then the name escaping me, Wes, the early tiny laptops 10, 12 years ago, what were those called?
Netbooks, and then
Netbooks,
we had
thank you.
OLPC too, yeah.
Right. So the funniest thing, when those first came out, they were going to change the world, and everyone's buying them, and they're coming with these like 7-inch keyboards. They're impossible to use. They were vastly underpowered.
And the web wasn't mature either, to handle.
Right. Yeah. The web wasn't really enough to be able to do that. But I used to laugh because, I would go to, in fact, one year I went to ISTE, and, a lot of people were carrying around a netbook, right? But they were carrying it in addition to their laptop. Right, so it's like if you truly think a netbook is the answer to your problems, great, then use that as your primary device. If you can't, then you should not be advocating for these as a revolutionary tool. Right, they can do some, but they can't bring the full suite of tools to students.
And your point about you're eating the dog food, you're full on Chrome. I think that for me, that's in my role. We're going to be looking at one-to-one, for a year from now, and we've got predominantly MacBook laptops in the hands of all of our teachers in our middle school. And that's across the board. But if we are going to be looking at perhaps doing something with one-to-one and devices, I think ideally your teachers and your students are going to be carrying the same device. And so anyway, it's something I've thought of before, but it's just something else I'm attending to a little more now. Well, we are about 18 minutes after the top of the hour. We did start late. I don't know if it didn't actually tell me how long we've been recording for. We want to pick up a couple more articles and then Geek of the Week it.
Sure. You dropped some things on esports. What's going on in the world of esports?
Oh man! So this is from I don't know this website, Gamma Sutra, May 20th, 2019. Some publishers pay streamers as much as $50,000 an hour to play new games. Talking about the ways in which influencers are so well compensated now. And then there was a CNET article on May 20th. Pro Fortnite player sues gaming organization over oppressive contract. Esports are now at a level similar to professional athletics. The amount of money that kids are making, our athletic director's son is at the University of Oklahoma, and one of his friends is making thousands of dollars. In fact, I didn't see if I could do a podcast interview with him, actually, because he's making thousands of dollars playing esports, and in some cases traveling, in some cases just playing from his dorm room or his house or whatever. In the case of this pro Fortnite player in the CNET article, he was in a very oppressive contract. They were taking like 80% of his earnings, but then they were prohibiting him from competing in some other places. And basically, these young people need to have agents and make sure they're not getting taken advantage of in the same way that somebody who's going to be going into the college athletic world, and then certainly from college into the professional world, right, needs to have good counsel, right, legal counsel, because you're talking about lots and lots of money. So this is also something I think, the Huawei news thing is probably something that people aren't as attuned to. And if you're not paying attention, you may not realize what a gigantic thing esports are. How many of the students in your classroom or in your home today are spending a lot of time watching other people play play electronic games? And, it's just, again, barring some kind of massive disruption that's going to cause our digital economy to have the bottom fall out of it, we're going to continue to have a lot of folks playing games and being paid to play games and watching games. It is a spectator sport. And so I thought both of those articles were pretty notable. So, Jason, when you all were hosting your exchange student last year, was he a gamer, a game watcher?
Oh, yeah. Fortnite was the game of choice then. And in fact, he kind of introduced me to that. And he like it was like classic American teen situation. He last spring or so, when he was here, we went to spring break in the Washington coast, and I ended up finding another location, and I was the last throes of my dissertation, so I spent most of that week writing. But he was at a house my in-laws had rented. So these are effectively his American grandparents, and he spent most of the week playing Fortnite. And of course, his host grandmother was just, I don't understand why he needs to play, the whole week. And, it was funny because it's like, welcome to being an American teen. And then, to my mother-in-law, welcome to being a grandma in 2018, right? But yeah, he introduced me a lot to that. And for him, it was a connection not only to new American friends, right? Because he was playing Fortnite against a lot of people that he was going to school with, but it was also an opportunity for him to keep connected to students that he went to school with in Sweden. And so for him, it was, well, I think we actually had the article, we talked about the article on here, but the social network of choice for a lot of American teens is Fortnite, right? Because there is a communication component. It's much more significant than a lot of first-person shooters that have existed in the past. But this notion of that a lot of interaction goes on in that environment, I think is pretty funny and extraordinary, and certainly something of interest. And I think, Wes, you are correct that, I think it's easy to kind of, tilt your head and squint your eyes at this because of, well, wait, you're watching someone else play the game, but let's remember, sports, right? You're watching someone else play the game? Like, well, that's correct, right? Like that we have a multi-gazillion dollar industry around people watching, in some cases, sports that are pretty obscure, but are still at a professional level and have enough money changing hands to have people be full-time and part of that process. So there are esports teams and squads across the United States at American high schools. I want to say I heard this a couple of months back, that a couple of state athletic boards, every state does this a little differently. It's a nonprofit in Montana that regulates high school sports, but have looked into providing some state regulated esport competition so they can help put the same processes that help protect students in competitions in wrestling or football or volleyball, in esports as well. And to quote a former boss of mine in Helena, coming to a school near you. So that is something that we probably see more and more in the future.
Absolutely. All right. Well, hopefully next week we will figure out a live streaming mode, but we're going to probably do a few geeks a week and wrap this one up. So you want to
Sure.
go first?
Yeah, I have two quick things to share. A travel tip that which I'm in the middle of doing right now. My wife and I like to use Airbnb as a strategy for finding. It's not just inexpensive; it is about expense in part, but it's also because I like to find unique places to stay that every Holiday Inn Express room looks like every other Holiday Inn Express room, right? And if you want to live in a city and experience what it's like to be in a city, I think the best place to do that is to live in someone's home, and that used to be a complicated, somewhat arduous process to find opportunities to do that. Airbnb is obviously something that has helped shake up that industry substantially. It doesn't come without controversy because it does do things like raise rents in high rent markets across the United States. But as a consumer that uses the tool, I know a lot of people have had bad experiences on Airbnb because some people are not totally up and up actors in this arena, and you can stay in some pretty gross, disgusting properties, and there's been some real abuse, including live video cameras in apartments and yada, yada, yada. And one of the ways my wife and I have had a really great experience using Airbnb is there's a search thing you can do in the advanced search of Airbnb properties where you can only do what's called a superhost. And superhost is an identified person that works with Airbnb that has an established great ratings, and it can be trusted in essence. Usually it involves more vetting on the part of Airbnb to do that. The properties are generally more expensive than the off-the-shelf Airbnb stuff, but since you're usually saving so much off of traditional hotels anyway, it's a great idea, I think, to be able to do that. And I particularly recommend if you're a conference goer, in any conference, but my partner in crime and I at the Digital Academy, Micah Castanelli and I, were going to go to ISTE this year. We ended up having to do something back in Missoula for 2 of those days, so we're not going to attend this year, but ISTE hotel rooms were approaching $400 a night for conference hotels. We found a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment that had 2 bathrooms, which is not something you see that often, that was 6 blocks away from the conference center for $110 a night. And so shared, it would be well less than what we pay for a single room between the 2 of us. And so Superhost is the way to go. And then this is really exciting for me, mentioning that I have been kind of Chromebook only for some time now. One of my favorite tools is Text Expander. It's my favorite text expansion software. It works very slickly on Windows, very slickly on Mac OS. And up until very recently, there wasn't a very effective tool for doing text expansion in Chrome OS. Well, there's a public beta now for Text Expander for Chrome. I was actually on the private beta list, and I think I'm not sure if I signed an NDA, but I promised them that I wouldn't say anything out loud. And I've been testing it myself for 6 months now, and it's now got a public beta. To be clear, this is a pay-for service. Text Expander is not, it's commercial software. You have to buy a license for it, but it is slick. And one of the reasons why I've been able to go Chrome only, Chromebook only, is because Text Expander is now available for Chrome. So if you are, I think there's a 30-day free trial that you can utilize if you are a text expansion person. Of all the many little tips I like to provide for people, text expansion has really been my #1 go-to for being really productive, especially with email. So Text Expander for Chrome, now available in the Chrome Web Store. Worth your time, great productivity tip.
Awesome. So I'm just gonna have one this week. Normally my 3, and I abuse Geek of the Week all the time. So anyway, this is just one. Derek Mueller has a wonderful Twitter channel called Veritaseum, and I actually got to see him present at the Miami Device Conference probably about 3 years ago. And he just did a video, it's a little longer for him, 23 minutes long, and he calls it "My Video Went Viral, Here's Why." But this is actually an extremely insightful sort of, explanation as well as critique of how the algorithm with YouTube has been changing, how that's really difficult for the creators of the platform, and how actually, according to what he's saying, it is giving people, quote, what they want, but it's really leading to a lot of clickbait and a lot of low quality content if you want your stuff to be seen. So I'd really commend it to you if you'd like to understand the YouTube platform better. He's also just a great storyteller, right? So he's using these, an easel with hand-drawn illustrations and things, and he's a very good explainer. So that video, which is pretty new, May 19th, already has 1.8 million views. Great channel to subscribe to, and a great video that can help us understand YouTube more. So, Jason, what have we been up to here the past hour doing? And, is this something that people can find out more about somewhere?
Well, as it turns out, Wes, yes, that is available in many places on the web. So this is the EdTech Situation Room. We're a once-a-week podcast where Wes and I like to dig through the headlines for technology and kind of toss them back and forth looking for the educational angle. If you'd like to join us, we are live Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Mountain, 9 p.m. Central. I think we've discovered that it jumps back and forth, but 3 o'clock a.m. UTC if you are an international time kind of person. But if you can't join us live, although please do, we tweet out every week when we can go live, and we love to have people in our chat room when YouTube is working for us as expected. But if you can download this podcast anywhere finer podcasts are aggregated. It includes the Stitcher platform. Downcast has the EdTech Situation Room, and as of late, every time I try out a new podcast app, I can find our podcast there. So please download that there. Hey, Wes, speaking of you, where can people find you on the internet?
I am W. Fryer on Twitter. My blog is Speed of Creativity. I've actually written a blog post the last 2 days, so I'm I think I'm going to be a bit unleashed in my new role. So I'm looking forward to doing a lot more writing and blogging. But you can find most of my content there on speedofcreativity.org. And how about you?
I'm a Tech Savvy Teacher on Twitter. I have not blogged the last 2 days. The blog that I work with, which is the Northwest Council for Computer Education Tech Savvy Teacher blog.ncc.org. But I would like to announce that a call for proposals is up. If you go to www.ncc.org, you can go to next year's conference, which is in fabulous Seattle, Washington, and see more information there about presenting at that wonderful conference, which is something that you'll go and see me at each and every year.
Awesome. Well, I was looking, there is an option. We're doing Zoom tonight, and so I'll be uploading this to YouTube rather than having the automatic happen there. But there are some live streaming options from Zoom. Maybe we could experiment with Facebook live streaming, Jason, because it looks like there's a configuration, and that would be interesting to probably, connect with a larger audience there. Who knows? But we appreciate everyone tuning in tonight.
Great. And thanks, and we'll see you next time on the EdTech Situation Room. Good night.